Hi, this is OPSIX, a 6-operator digital synth designed for FM, phase modulation, subtractive synthesis, wave shaping, and audio rate cross mods with up to 32 voices. In this video, I'll explain how all these things work within OPSIX, including a beginner's look at FM synthesis. I'll address some patch ideas, take a look at the pros and cons, and play quite a few of its presets at the end. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Korg sent OPSIX over for review, but as always, they have no say over the content of this video. This channel is funded by viewers who support it on Patreon, the ad you just skipped, or YouTube Premium, and the occasional affiliate link in the description. Let's start with an overview. OPSIX is a 6-operator digital synth. Now, when you hear operators, you might immediately think of FM synthesis and bells and the DX7, where an operator is a sine wave oscillator whose frequency or phase actually can be modulated, but with OPSIX, each single operator can do way more than just play a sine wave or modulate phase or frequency. Indeed, the basic wave shape of an operator is a sine wave, but there are quite a few other shapes. As you can see in this list. And while it does have FM or phase modulation, it also has quite a few other synthesis options. We'll take a look at all of these. By the way, OPSIX also has a built-in scope and spectrum analyzer. But I'll still use my handy-dandy external ones so we don't have to flip to these screens every time. Aside from operator cross-modulations, OPSIX has a few filter emulations and effects. The interface on the right is pretty straightforward. There are a few pages that you page through, and the data encoders change whatever parameter that's related to their position on the screen. So there are always 6 parameters on screen. If I wanted to change the attack of this operator, I would just turn this encoder, release is here, curve is here, and so on. The highlight of the show, I think, is the operator mixer. It's these 6 faders and knobs. These, by default, change operator level and operator frequency or frequency ratio. I think these are what makes the exploration of the various synth options here super interesting. You'll notice that the LEDs around these knobs are either red or pinkish, blue or purple. If they're red, they're a carrier. If they're blue, they're a modulator. If they're purple, they're both a carrier and a modulator, and we'll address what those things are very soon. OPSIX can store 500 presets on board, and it comes with 250 factory presets. You've got a 16-step sequencer, which has 6 lanes of automation and 6-note polyphony. It is, however, like I mentioned, only 16 steps. You've got a favorites option to swap presets, and a really nice feature here is that as you change presets, the first preset sound doesn't get cut off when you move on to the next preset. The build is very solid and sits on the table very sturdily. This is metal, but the rest is plastic. Overall, this is like wave state. It's a very light synth. The pitch bend and mod wheel are as you'd expect. The key bed is full size but has a very light action. As you can hear, OPSIX is polyphonic, but it's not multi-timbral. So even though presets do get held, as you change them, overall, you can't play 2 timbres at once, other than a few hacks I'll show you later on. From a synthesis perspective, aside from the operator's filter and effects, you've got 3 envelope generators, 3 LFOs. The envelopes have default routings to the pitch and filter, but you also have a 12-slot mod matrix, which is called virtual patching, which is accessible here. Then a few other miscellaneous features. The sequencer can be set to trigger when you hit play, obviously, or when you hit a key, which will transpose it. Other than that, there's a simple arpeggiator and a nifty randomization feature, which will let you randomize the entire preset or different parts of it. So let's say if I wanted to randomize just the effects, I could do this. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's do that again. And again. Or randomize the entire preset, where you can get something completely different, or nothing, or sometimes something interesting. So if you're stuck for creative ideas, try randomization. Anyway, that's it for the general overview. From a connectivity perspective, OPSIX has both MIDI in and out, USB for MIDI only or firmware updates, a sustain pedal input, and 2/4-inch outputs, as well as a headphone output, which ideally we'd like to see on the front, but at least it's to the far left. Okay, so with the overview out of the way, let's talk about what this business of operators and algorithms is all about. This part of the video will be very beginner friendly, so if you're up to speed, feel free to skip ahead using the timeline on the left. With OPSIX, each of the operators has the same capabilities. If you take a closer look at the pages over here, these 3 buttons move you to generic pages, and these 3 buttons move you to pages that are specific to operators. When you press these as opposed to these, you'll see this LED light up, which shows you which operator you're editing, and then you can go back and forth between the 6 operators and choose which one you want to edit. Occasionally, one of these pages or tabs will have a few sub-pages or tabs. You'll see dots here on top when you move into it, and you can move around between the pages using the page button. Each of the operators can be in one of 5 main modes: FM, ring mod, filter, filter FM, and wave folder. You choose the mode with this encoder over here, so it's pretty simple and straightforward. Now, an operator can be either connected to the output or not. If it's connected to the output, meaning we hear it, it's called a carrier, so we can control its level and its pitch. Pitch is determined as a ratio to the key that you play. You can see these 2 operators are red or pink, which means we can hear them. Control their level and pitch separately. When an operator is a modulator, you can't hear it. So if I reduce the level of these 2 operators and increase the level of operator 2, you can see we're not hearing it because it's not connected to the output. Rather, it's connected to modulate a different operator. In this case, operator 2 is modulating the phase or frequency of operator 1. When an operator is a modulator, this doesn't determine its level, it determines the mod depth, which is really level, but in more simple terms, it's mod depth. So if we listen to operator 1 now and increase the level of operator 2, we increase the level of modulation of operator 1. Now this is called FM because if we reduce the frequency of operator 2 to a really low rate, it becomes an LFO, and you can hear it as a change in frequency, a vibrato basically, of operator 1. But as we increase the frequency of operator 2, it gets into a faster wobble, and then at audio rates, it changes the timbre of operator 1, generating additional harmonics, changing its timbre, and the higher the ratio, the higher the harmonics. One more element of FM synthesis is feedback. You can have an operator modulate the frequency or phase of itself with feedback. That changes a sine wave gradually to a sawtooth and ultimately to noise. Now, the last thing you need to understand is algorithms, which, like I mentioned earlier, is very simply which operator is connected to modulate which other operator. So in this algorithm, operator 2 is modulating operator 1, and you can see that in the diagram over here. This little number 2 on the die modulates operator number 1. And if we lower all of these, you can hear operator number 1 because it's connected to the output. That's what this little line at the bottom means. Operator 3 is also connected to the output. That's why we can hear it. And then operators 4, 5, and 6 are all connected in a chain to each other, meaning they can impact operator 3. Operator 5 is set up to modulate operator 4 here, which in turn is set up to modulate operator 3. Which means, by the way, if we bring this all the way down, doing this won't change anything. Then operator 6 follows operator 5. And that's how you create different timbres with sine waves with FM synthesis. OPSIX, like I mentioned earlier, has a bunch of different waveforms. These sort of lo-fi sine waves, triangle waves. The two sawtooths here, this is a regular sawtooth, which gives you up to 32 voice polyphony, and if you use the HD versions, they sound better, and you get only up to 24 voices. Anyway, last note about these algorithms is that you can change them. So this is only one of 40 available routings. So for example, if we wanted to hear all 6 operators, connect all of them to the output, we'd go to algorithm number 32. This basically gives us a drawbar style organ where we can change the frequencies. And of course, the different frequencies are what will determine the timbre of this organ sound. And if these algorithms aren't enough for you, you can also define your own custom user algorithm where you can connect any of the operators to the output so you can hear it and have any of the operators cross-modulate any of the other ones. So you enter that mode by hitting Shift Miscellaneous and going into user algorithm. And this has just 2 pages, which operators are connected to the direct output and which operators are modulating any of the other ones. So if I wanted to hook all of these to the output, I'd just turn them all on. If I wanted to turn operator 2 off and then have, say, it modulate operator 1, I could even determine the level of that modulation. So that's the basic algorithm we showed before. Of course, with ratios. And then you can have an operator both be a modulator and a carrier. Just by turning it on, you'll notice the color change from blue to purple here. So we've pretty much covered all the timbral aspects of the FM operator. One more important thing that makes operators special is that they have their dedicated envelopes. Now, these envelopes are dedicated per operator as opposed to the other global envelopes that apply to the entire voice, to all 6 operators. An operator envelope lets you modulate its level. So for operators that we hear, meaning carriers, if we go into the operator envelope here, we can, for example, slow down the attack here, have it come in gradually. There's an ADSR envelope here, attack, sustain, decay, release. We can increase the release. So this envelope applies to level. Where it gets interesting is when you apply this envelope to modulators and not carriers. An envelope changing the level of a modulator will cause a change in timbre. So let's look at the envelope of operator 2. For that we need to go to operator 2, and let's make this a simple attack decay envelope. So we'll bring it in gradually and have it decay gradually, and we do need to have a basic level set up. Now you could hear that motion. Okay, so this is without any motion. With a decay, an attack. So that's the operator envelope, and each operator has a dedicated envelope. Okay, so that's basic FM. Let's take a look at a few advanced options that these operators give us. Still staying in FM mode, you have control over the width of the operator's waveform, which obviously changes its harmonic structure. And this works for all the shapes. So yes, if we go into square, you've got pulse width modulation, and you can of course modulate this if you want, but this applies to any of the other shapes. So if you go to additive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can squeeze and spread out that one as well. So nice timbral options there. Now there are a lot of parameters here that we won't get into, but one more thing you should know about these operators is that they're not limited just to ratios of whatever note you play. So if we head out to the pitch menu and choose this page, and let's maybe have operator 3 play in parallel, we could just transpose it just like you would any other synth in semitones or with coarse and fine controls. So you're not just limited to ratios, you can actually just fix the frequency of an operator regardless of the note you play. In this case, transpose doesn't do much, but you can change the frequency like this, or just by turning this knob for fine-tune control. Okay, so that's the FM operator mode. Let's move on to ring mod mode. And you select that in the mode parameter, and we go into operator 1 in this case, and then choose ring mod mode. So just like FM is modulation of frequency, let's maybe increase sustain here, then ring mod is modulation of amplitude or level. Now at low rates, it just sounds like tremolo. By the way, if you play like this gradually, it's a very cool tremolo. Anyway, but at higher audio rates, then like FM, it starts to change the timbres of the sound really nicely. Up to, again, metallic noisiness. You can clearly see what this is doing to the harmonics. This mode also gives you shape control, which is a rectifier that basically adds more harmonics. And depth is the balance between the oscillator and the ring mod sound. Okay, the next mode up is filter mode. Now this is again separate from the overall global filter. This is a specific filter applied to a specific operator. Let's move ahead into filter mode, and there's no point in filtering a sine wave. Let's go for our saw. In filter mode, you get a mix between the carrier and any modulator that's fed into it. And yeah, there's a low pass filter with a cutoff and resonance, as you'd expect. And a bunch of other filters, high pass, band pass with resonance, of course, band reject, then a few specific models, Moog filter, and an MS-20 mode as well. Now I've noticed these don't sound exactly like the main filter, but yeah, they're still useful and work. High pass mode for this as well. Anyway, those are the different filter modes. And in filter mode, as opposed to filter FM mode, like I mentioned, operator 2 is basically just an audible oscillator that's being fed into the filter as well, if we include it in the mix. So this is operator 2 and operator 1. They just get fed into the filter together. So filter mode is an exception to the rule where modulators can't be heard, but if we go into filter FM mode, then that's where operator 2 modulates the frequency of the cutoff of the filter. So here again at low rates we get a nice wobble, but as we increase rates as expected, craziness and additional timbres ensue. So that's filter FM, and then finally the last mode is wave folder mode. In this mode we hear operator 2 as well, by the way, so let's first listen just to operator 1. And let's turn it into a regular sine wave, and wave folding as you'd expect. Makes this nice sound. And we can bring in oscillator, or operator 2 in this case. So number 2, number 1, both. By the way, if you're open to harsh tones, just increase the frequencies, add gain, modulate this. And I don't know if it's aliasing or transformers, but there are interesting timbres to be explored there. Okay, so those are the operators. Let's take a look at the more traditional synth features. Let's just go back into regular FM mode and maybe take a sawtooth wave and check out the main filter. This filter is the global voice filter, as opposed to a filter you can activate in each and every one of the operators individually. This has a few modes. When it says 12 here, it's a 12 dB per octave or 2-pole slope. which is a good match for polyphonic sounds. And you've got a 24 dB per octave slope as well, with resonance, of course. And there are a few models here, an MS-20 model. Then there's a Poly 6 model. And high pass options, band pass options with a few slopes, band reject, which is notch filters. Moving on to the effects, you've got 3 effects slots and I think 50 options for each. Nice. Let's maybe take a couple of minutes to listen to these. It's a chorus, unison ensemble, phaser, tempo synced, auto pan, tempo synced, flanger, speaks for itself, guitar amp, delay is always nice, tempo synced or not, in stereo by the way. And there's a non-tempo sync delay if you want those analog style bends. Let's move on. Reverbs. Very nice reverb here, and a few spaces to explore in here. This is the hall. And aside from these types of reverbs, you also have a shimmer or pitch shifted reverb. And this can shift either up, riser, or down. And there's also, this is nice. There's also a horror version. And I think that's it. There's a spring reverb too. Cool. All right, so those are the effects. Let's move on to the arpeggiator and sequencer. The arpeggiator is pretty simple and straightforward. It can latch if you hold this. And if you hit Shift ARP, there are a few options relative to speed. Okay, octave options. And a few patterns. Stranger Things mode. Cool, so that's the arpeggiator. With the step sequencer, you can either step sequence or record live. Let's show you recording step by step. And with 16 steps, this is what we have to work with. And we can edit the sequence parameters. There are a few pages here, but we certainly want to speed it up and give it some swing. Cool. And we can also record live into the sequence, polyphonically. Now, aside from recording notes, you can also record automation. So you can automate, I think, practically anything here. Let's maybe automate the timbre, recording motion. Let's automate something else, maybe. filter too. And resonance. You can see it move over here. So that's the sequencer. If you want to change things later on, like step offsets, you can go ahead and edit step by step if you like both the notes and the automation. So for example, for the automation, we've got 4 lanes. We've got up to 6, but these are the parameters that I chose to automate. And same goes for notes. We can look at the different notes on a per step basis, edit the different steps. And there are also a few nice sequence utilities, which we won't cover here. You can copy and paste stuff, and there are a few automations that you can target to the motion sequencing lanes. Okay, so I think we pretty much covered everything. Let's take a look at a few patch ideas. I'll go to an init preset. So like I mentioned earlier, OPSIX isn't bi-timbral unless you count playing a preset, holding the notes, and moving to a different preset, but that's not sustainable if you don't mind the pun. However, you do have 6 oscillators or operators, and you don't need to use all of them at once or all of them for the same timbre. Let me show you a quick way where you can split any of the operators to any half of the keyboard you like. Let's just make this simple with 2 operators, but it applies to all the others. So in this case, I've got operator 1 as a sine wave, and just so we hear the difference, let's make operator 3 as a sawtooth. By default, they play together across the entire keyboard, but operators have a neat feature called operator level key tracking. This is designed to let you increase the intensity of an operator as you play up and down the keyboard, but you can take it to an extreme. Let's maybe just listen to operator 3 in this case and chop it up all the way down around a certain center. Here it's C4, so as I play down the keyboard, it'll just stop at C4, and I can set the split wherever I want. Let's say put it at G4. So now I've got this going on in this split, this operator playing in this split and not playing on the left, and I can transpose it if I wanted it to play lower, and you probably get what's coming next. I can go to operator 1 and look at it, chop off its high, and then move that to F#4, so it won't play above the split point. Now if I bring operator 3 back up, I have a perfect split, and now I could continue to sculpt the timbre of each half completely independently of the other half. Now the global filter and the effects will apply to both, but obviously the operator filter won't. So I could move this operator into filter mode and, you know, sculpt this tone completely regardless of whatever this is doing. So moving the filter on operator 3 obviously won't impact operator 1. Now, like I mentioned, the effects will apply to both, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, that's if you want pitch to control different timbres. There's a preset which does it nicely, so I'll do that here. So let's, for example, look at this. So this preset just lets 3 operators do their own thing. So of course, programming each operator separately to do its own thing is another way to go. Bi or tri-timbral. Let's go back to an init preset, take a look at a few other ideas. There's a velocity modifier both for carriers, but also for modulators, which is extremely useful. So for carriers, it's straightforward. The harder you press, the louder the carrier. But more interestingly, when you use a velocity modifier on a modulator, it increases its mod depth. So things sound pretty static as is, but if we increase the velocity sensitivity, then we get different timbres the harder we press. Next up, what if you wanted more than one arpeggiator? Well, the ratio parameter essentially generates quantized notes, and if we modulate it, we can get harmonically relevant melodies. So if we were to go ahead into pitch and apply LFO1 to pitch, it would just be vibrato. So we don't want to change the pitch, we want to change the ratio, and we can do that in the mod matrix. Let's pick, for example, LFO1, and then as a destination, we want to choose operator 1's not pitch, but coarse ratio. Let's go into LFO1 and change its speed. So as we lower this, we get an arpeggiated pattern, and the number of notes that play depend on the mod depth in the mod matrix. Now, as an advanced option, by default the LFOs are in sync. So if we play this gradually, we'll still get a synced LFO, but we can go into key sync and change it to per voice and get interesting arpeggiated patterns that way. Next up, and there's a nice preset that shows this, is create massive chords. Yeah, this really nicely shows, I mean, drawbar organs are nice, but if we just get these to match their position. So this is one oscillator, this is another, and another. This lets you create 6-note chords just by changing the operator intervals. Next little tip or trick, OPSIX doesn't have a chord mode. Now, you can sort of work around this if you go into sequencer mode. Remember how we stepped through the sequence and it played different chords? You can just program chords into various parts of the sequence and then play them this way. Another trick that's demonstrated nicely in this preset, you can take a chord sequence and run it through the ARP, essentially giving you more than 16 steps. Another neat little trick to fake hard sync. Two oscillators cross-modded to each other with FM sound like this when they're sine waves, but if you choose a different shape, let's say a square, you can get to a hard sync-like sound. You can mess around with a modulator wave shape as well, so it doesn't have to be a sine wave, it can be set to taste. So that's nice, and for the last trick, let me just open up another init preset. Okay, so as odd as it sounds, OPSIX doesn't have a filter cutoff knob. Now it does have a filter cutoff control if you go into the filter and turn this knob, but this works, but it's not a potentiometer encoder, it's a sort of step encoder. It doesn't feel like a proper filter knob should, and you don't have direct access to it. You need to go into the filter and then turn it. So I wouldn't be talking about this if I didn't have a way around it. Now this requires using the operator filters. Let's just turn all of them down and move into filter mode. Okay, so we have a filter here. Now this filter moves around with a pitch of this knob, which happens to be a very nice pot style knob, but obviously we don't want ratios going on. So the trick is to go into operator pitch and to change the ratio to a fixed ratio. And this gives us smooth frequency control. The problem is we're hearing the oscillator move along with the filter. So the solution is to turn oscillator mix all the way over here. So now we're no longer hearing the operator, but the filter is still working. Trust me on this. And if we go to operator 2 and it's in saw, which is fine, bring its level up, we can tune it any way we want. And now we've got filter cutoff control here, which is very smooth, very controller friendly, and exists regardless of the mode. Let's just add some more effects because reverb is always nice. Anyway, like you saw, I moved to effects. I've still got filter control here. Regardless of the mode, this brings us very nicely to the pros and cons. So obviously there's a feature request here to let you map these knobs and faders to any parameter you want. But aside from that, I think the top 3 cons, at least in my opinion. Number one, I wish the sequencer would have more than 16 steps. Number two, I wish this was multi-timbral. The hack I showed you earlier is nice, but it would be better if this was officially supported with, say, multiple MIDI channels. This has between 24 to 32 voice polyphony. Controlling it externally alongside with playing it with a keyboard would be fantastic. And then the third con, I think, is that this has only 3 octaves for a polyphonic synth, especially one that can be multi-timbral using the hack I showed you before. It would be nice if we had more keys, or maybe a module option. I have no idea if that's coming, but it would be nice in this case. Aside from that, the keybed is rather light, and it doesn't have aftertouch, which I know is important to a lot of people. A module version of this would solve that problem too. Other feature requests or minor annoyances, it would be nice if I could just touch a parameter and then choose what modulates it, or choose a modulator and touch the parameter that it modulates. Currently, you need to go into the mod matrix and use a menu to do that. It's not that big of a hassle, but it would be more immediate if you could just do it directly. On the pros side, this is the cleanest and easiest to understand and use implementation of FM that I've ever seen in a synth. The Digitone comes close and is multi-timbral, plus it has a better and longer sequencer, but on the FM side it only has 4 operators and doesn't have the direct hands-on controls that this operator mixer gives you. Now these kinds of options are available on other synths like Iridium or Yamaha's Modi X, but none have this type of direct control that is a great opportunity to learn and experiment with cross-mod or FM synthesis. The color coding here for the algorithms, I think, is just brilliant. The best approach I've seen yet to make FM synthesis as malleable as a filter cutoff knob is to subtractive synthesis. OPSIX isn't just an FM synth, it's actually a 6 oscillator polyphonic synth with dozens of voices of polyphony and multiple synthesis techniques, something you don't see every day at this price point. And finally, God bless, I love the fact that if you change a preset by mistake, you can always undo it. It's always nice not to have the hard work you put into designing a sound be suddenly erased because you hit the wrong knob. Speaking of not working hard, if you want to know how to make the most of the LFOs, envelopes, and patching options here, you might want to check out my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, available to the good people who support this channel on Patreon. That's it for now. Hit like if this was useful, ring the bell after subscribing to make sure you don't miss the next one. Stick around for the presets. Thanks for watching.